Germany is reckoning with the results of regional elections that have left many questioning whether German history is rearing its ugly head. For the first time since Nazi rule, right-wing extremists have won a regional election in Germany in the state of Thuringia. The AfD, or Alternative for Germany, also came in second place in neighboring Saxony. Now, other populists also snapped up votes by promising to stop immigration and to stop arms deliveries to Ukraine. So what does this mean for the future of Europe's largest economy and its relation to the world? This week on To The Point, we're looking at the rise of the far right. Is Germany at a tipping point? Hello, I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin. A very warm welcome to this week's edition of To The Point. I'd like to introduce our panel. Today we have Wolfgang Merkel, former professor of political science at Humboldt University. We have Matthew Karnitschnig, Politico's chief Europe correspondent. And Nadine Lindner, correspondent in Deutschlandradio's Berlin bureau. Very warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here. Nadine, let's start with you. What does the AfD stand for that was so appealing to voters in these eastern states?
Well, the AfD is 11 years old now. Most of the voters in Germany know what the AfD stands for. I would say in this election campaign, we saw like 2 or 3 main topics that the AfD focuses on. The main topic, the number one topic, is migration, to stop the influx of asylum seekers to Germany, to deport people from Germany to their home countries, the remigration, how they frame this concept. Then the second point is to stop the war in Ukraine by stopping the arms deliveries to Ukraine. And I would say the third point is more like a cultural war that they want to, or that they see, they argue against the open display of homosexuality and also the use of gender-neutral language. These are all points that that were important for the AfD in this election campaign.
Now, these successes do have alarm bells going off in many quarters in Germany. Wolfgang, for the first time since the end of World War II, we're looking here at a party that German intelligence has designated as right-wing extremists in Saxony and Thuringia, winning these regional elections, one of them, the other one performing very well. How much of a taboo would you say has been broken here?
The taboo was broken before. It was broken when AfD entered the German parliament, the Bundestag, with roughly 8 or 12% of the votes. This was the first time when a right-wing populist party, I prefer populist, right-wing populist party, because right extremist party, this is something, as you have said, which was born out of the terminology of the internal secret service, the intelligence. And
upheld by a court in Germany as well.
No, they only said you are entitled to call them a right-wing extremist party. They did not decide on the substantial matter. There is a difference on it. So I would say the taboo is broken, and in a way it is a European normalization, not a pleasant normalization, but we have seen this in many, many other countries before. Right-wing populists were governing in 15 countries of the European Union. And this Germany still is far from a situation where the AfD would enter the federal government. So to some extent we hear typical German alarmist subtones in the discussion, but the development is not very pleasant, no doubt.
Okay, so you think this is a bit overblown. Matthew, maybe you can put this into perspective for our international viewers, those who are maybe not closely following German politics, and understand how the AfD was seen previously, how a party that can be called right-wing extremist coming into power really resonates here.
Well, I think it resonates in particular, as we saw in these elections in the east of Germany, where there's a lot of frustration with the traditional parties, with the establishment parties in Germany, and in particular with the current government under Olaf Scholz. And as Nadine mentioned, migration has been a very central issue. Recently in Germany, there were some recent killings involving asylum seekers, allegedly, in Germany, knife attacks. And so this has become a very heated political issue, and the AfD has been very skilled in seizing on the migration issue and also the question of Islam in Germany, which is very closely related to that in the minds of many people, because most of the asylum seekers here have come from the Muslim world. And over the past 10 years, viewers might remember Angela Merkel's famous statement that Germany can manage this influx of asylum seekers in the wake of the Syrian civil war in 2015. And since then, the country has brought in about 2 million people. And the AfD has, over that period, gone from the low single digits now nationally to the high teens, and in some states, Thuringia and Saxony, as we saw, over 30%. So their success is very closely tied to this question of migration.
And Nadine, how does that compare to what we might have seen in the last 10 years in Germany? And you look at the way that they campaign, the kind of policies that they're putting forward. Would this have shocked Germans of your childhood?
I think yes. To see a party that is that strong. The AfD reached 32.8% in Thuringia. It's on place 1, like with a huge distance to the CDU on place 2. So what we see here is that within society, there are a lot of people supporting AfD. And I think there's like one point that really changed in the last 10 years. Maybe 10 years ago, the AfD is 11 years old now. Maybe 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, we would have said, well, the AfD is only a phenomenon for a short time. When we beat them in the elections, they will like more or less disappear. And now we know, no, they're here to stay, and they have like a long-term strategy to destroy the CDU, the Conservative Party here in Germany. They say, well, now we forced the CDU into really awkward, strange coalitions, because this is what's going to happen in Thuringia and also in Saxony, that maybe the CDU will work together with the ex-communist party of Sarah Wagenknecht.
Mm-hmm. We'll come to them in a moment.
Nobody knows if this is going to work, and the AfD says, well, this is a coalition that's not going to work, that will lead to a lot of frustration for people who voted for CDU. So we just wait 5 more years until 2029, and then we have the majority, and then the CDU is gone. Nobody knows if this plan is going to work, but this is the long-term strategy behind it.
Nadine, you've mentioned it just there. These regional elections, they saw the triumph of populist ideas more generally, not just the far right, also the far left doing well. And that's something that you can really only read as a resounding rejection of the more traditional parties, including those that are currently in government together at the national level.
In Thuringia, the AfD took over 30% of the vote under the leadership of Björn Höcke. It's the first time a party classified by the Office for the Protection of the Constitution as extreme right has won a state election.
Wir sind die Volkspartei Nummer 1 in Thüringen. Sie wollen doch nicht ein Drittel der Thüringer Wähler als rechtsextrem einstufen.
Höcke scored points with voters with his ethno-nationalist ideology by campaigning against migration and against further aid to Ukraine. In Saxony, the AfD also received more than 30% of the vote to become the second strongest party after the CDU. By contrast, the parties that form Germany's current federal government, the SPD, Greens, and FDP, received fewer votes than in any previous state election. The populist Sarah Wagenknecht alliance, which splintered off from the Left Party, won big after securing double-digit election results. In Berlin, they issued this fierce criticism against the traffic light coalition's Ukraine policy. I'm tired of being treated like fools here. We keep being told that we can end the war by supplying more and more weapons. Do the election results from Saxony and Thuringia 1 year before the federal elections herald a different Germany to come?
So we saw her there, Sarah Wagenknecht, the namesake of this new BSW party. Wolfgang, as I've said, they're new on the scene. They've really risen to success in these elections as well. Can you tell us a little bit about where they see eye to eye with the AfD on policies like immigration, like the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, but there are some similarities, but I wouldn't overstress this. If you look to the program of the Sarah Wagenknecht Party, we should call it this way because it's a complete Leninist and personalist party. But if we compare it with other European parties, the first, what you would say, it is somehow like the very traditional Social Democratic Party of Denmark. If it comes to distributional issues, if it comes to the question of state and market, it resembles a lot this German social democracy. If it comes to migration and immigration, it's exactly what they propose very successfully in Denmark. There's one difference you mentioned, certainly, and this is foreign policy and especially policies towards NATO and the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And this provokes certainly the German political establishment. But we should be calm and we should not compare it too much with this right-wing populist, to some extent semi-loyal party to democracy.
But let's be clear, when we're looking at the Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance's view toward the war in Ukraine, what exactly is it that they want?
They want, as they point out, they want to have negotiations. And they have the idea to freeze the conflict. Whether this is a good or bad idea, I don't want to judge it here. But the basic argument is the longer the war linges on, the more people will be killed. And at the end, there will be anyway negotiation. So what they have in mind, negotiations now, freezing the conflict, hoping that in 10, 20, 30 years, the situation will be a different one. And so they can negotiate the territorial losses. They count that there will be territorial losses for Ukraine.
And they want to end the arms deliveries, German arms deliveries to Ukraine as well.
Certainly.
A crucial point as well. Let's come back to immigration with you, Matthew, here. Germany, it does have a big demographic problem, doesn't it? There are a lot of old people. There are generous social programs that need to be supported by the youth. When voters in Saxony and Thuringia vote for the AfD or the Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance, are they voting against their own interests?
Some people would say so. There have been some interesting remarks in recent days by a governor of the Bundesbank, of the German central bank, who's sort of arguing in this direction because Germany is facing this demographic cliff. But I think on a day-to-day basis, for many people who are grappling with these problems, one of the issues that many of the refugees who have come are not easily put into the open positions in Germany, if you will. If you have, for example, a teenage Afghan refugee who is illiterate, and many of them are because they didn't go to school in Afghanistan, to train these people to work in a Audi factory or VW factory or to do something like that is quite complicated because first they have to learn German, for example. So all of these ideas about, being able to just take these refugees and to fill these gaps in the workforce are a little bit more complicated than people think. But the interesting thing about Thuringia and Saxony is that those are areas that have some of the lowest levels of migration in Germany. Most of the migrants who have come here are not in East Germany, they're in other parts of the country, but it is sort of in their heads that these asylum seekers pose a threat to German society and to German identity.
And Nadine, when you look at the AfD's platform regarding immigration, has this also had an effect on other parties within Germany, some of the more centrist or traditional ones? Has it dragged them further toward the right on that issue?
Yeah, I think there are like domino effects that you can see, that like one stone is tipping and then another stone follows, like in a domino game. I think if you look at the positions that the CDU is now proposing towards migration, I think you can really see that the CDU, the Christian Democratic Conservative Party, is now trying to be stricter against asylum seekers, also to be stricter within the set of rules within the European Union. They want to reject asylum seekers at the German border. And now there's like a current huge discussion whether this is possible within EU law or not. And I think, to my point of view, it's for the CDU, for the Conservatives, it's always a question of how far do they go on that slippery slope of following the AfD to populism. Because a lot of political scientists, also from France, they say there's like no use or there's like no good for the Conservatives to follow the right-wing radicalists, because then the voters won't vote for the Conservatives. They will always vote for the original, for the radicals. So I think what is important now is to have a pragmatic, solution-orientated discussion in this country to focus on the points that are possible, to reduce migration, to put more order in the influx of migrants and asylum seekers, and then also focus on the integration of people into society and into workforce. And the point is, there are like two interesting numbers. 60% of people in Thuringia say, oh, it's dangerous because we have so many foreigners in this country. But there's only 8% of the share of people in Thuringia that come from foreign countries. So you see, I would say, a huge imbalance between the perception and the real numbers. And the AfD is clearly focusing on this. And they say asylum seekers are a danger to our security here. And they refer to Islamic attacks like in Solingen.
All right, so that is the pitch to voters. It seems to have resonated. The election results, we can say for sure, are a slap in the face for the national government. Currently, that's, of course, a three-party coalition led by Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Ahead of those votes in Saxony and Thuringia, there was both high turnout and expectations.
I expected a change in policy, that something would change in the country. That all those arrogant politicians who are so sure of themselves might be knocked down a peg or two. Migration. Too many. Security, also a more stable economy. It's going downhill. The German economy is set to slide into a recession this year. Economists in particular believe that voting for the xenophobic AfD could be fatal because there is already a shortage of skilled workers. The technology company Jenoptik in Thuringia is seeing this firsthand. The people of Thuringia are a creative bunch, but we won't be able to fix it all by ourselves. We also need people from other parts of the world. Pritam Gaikwad from India is also concerned. I actually worry a lot. My family is also worried. They read what's in the news. Is the once rock-solid Germany becoming increasingly unstable politically and economically?
So Wolfgang, Nadine has said the AfD is here to stay. Do you agree with that? Because one statistic that I found quite surprising coming out of these elections was looking at the youth vote. These weren't conservative older voters voting for the far right. It was, in fact, 38% of people between the ages of 18 and 24 who turned out to vote for the AfD.
AfD is here to stay, at least for a couple of years, and I would assume even longer. Again, Germany, it's not the island of the happy people. It is an European country. And you see it in almost all of these European countries that these right-wing populist parties are becoming a quite stable element within all these party system. And there is a political space, as we have seen here in the perception of the people. There's a political space on the right wing of the party system. The Merkel, the previous chancellor of the German Federal Republic, moved with the CDU to the center of the party system and opened a political space on the right wing. And the right-wing populists marched in. So AfD will be here. The second reason will be that migration, it's a problem which will not be solved during the next years to come. The political parties have to demonstrate that they are able to solve problems, to deliver. And this again opens a political space for an anti-system party, at least partially anti-system party. They have the privilege to monopolize the real opposition, and this makes it attractive to many people. So this is European normality. Unfortunately, they will stay here because the problems they campaign on, the problems will stay. Last point, migration, for example, it's not a problem which can be solved by the federal government in Germany alone. They need a kind of European solution, and I don't see this European solution so far.
And I think some important context for those watching at home has been Germany's history of dealing with the AfD since it first came into the Bundestag, since it first came onto the scene, really. There's been a so-called firewall around them, right? That parties don't want to go into government together with the AfD. That's been something that's been taboo. Do you think that that firewall, Matthew, is going to stand now that we've seen such a high turnout at the regional level? And should it stand?
I think it will stand in Germany because of the examples that exist around Europe in terms of establishment parties going into coalition with the far-right populists. And it never ends well. And viewers can Google Austria and far-right, and we'll see why. There have been a few attempts there, and there might be a new attempt next month when Austria has elections. So I don't think there's a very convincing track record that going into coalition with the far-right is a path to political success. And
can you tell me more about the Austrian case? Because, sorry to interrupt, but that's interesting and perhaps very relevant for the moment we're in Germany.
Well, Austria really crossed that Rubicon in late 1999 when the center-right party at the time, the Austrian People's Party, decided to go into coalition with the far-right, with a man named Jörg Haider, who was really the pioneer of modern far-right populism in Europe, and he also ran on a very anti-migration platform. That government prompted the rest of Europe, the rest of the European Union, to impose what they then called diplomatic sanctions on Austria. So Austria was isolated for a short period of time. That didn't really last, but the government also didn't last. It was beset by scandal. And then the party, the Freedom Party, fell apart. Some years later, viewers might remember Sebastian Kurz, who was also the Chancellor of Austria, the sort of youthful Chancellor of Austria. He formed a coalition in 2018 with the Freedom Party again. And then there was a dramatic implosion of that government in a scandal just a couple of years later. So these parties have not proved to be very, very, very stable. And there is a lot of volatility in support for these far-right parties across Europe, but they do seem to be here to stay.
But Nadine, can you just ignore the will of 1/3 of the electorate in the states of Saxony and Thuringia? Is that in itself damaging to democracy to try to keep the AfD out from decision-making?
Well, this is the argument that the AfD uses. They say we represent 1/3 of the voters and it's not democratic to keep them out. I think there's one point we should have a closer look at. It's not only that we had elections in the Bundesländer, Thuringia and Saxony, but we also had votes for the communal, for the city parliaments in June. And what we see now is that the AfD now has vice mayors in several towns in Saxony with the help or against the CDU. So we see a two-way process of the AfD gaining more influence, gaining more power. I think for now it will be possible to keep the AfD out in Thuringia and in Saxony. I think it's right, but I also see the representation problem for sure. But I think we shouldn't give the country to the populists.
Because that would open the floodgates to normalizing far-right ideology?
I think the process of normalization is already there. If we look at the young voters that we saw in the pictures, the AfD is now 11 years old. When you're a voter of maybe 18, 19, 20, the AfD naturally belongs to the party system that you know since your childhood. So I think we have to deal with a lot of different layers and levels, and I think we should really focus on the youth to kind of prevent them into growing into voting for AfD longer.
Now, as we've said at the beginning, there is a lot of fear around what's happened here, partially because Thuringia was the place in 1930 where the Nazi Party had its first success, becoming only the second largest party in regional elections, and that allowed them into government. Wolfgang, do you think this is history repeating itself here?
No, not at all. And this is a wrong comparison. We would relativize the horrendous crime of the Nazi regime, and we should be more analytical. This is not simply an following up party of the National Socialist and Hitler. This does not really keep the point, and we don't find the causes for the strength of the right-wing populist party.
With only a few seconds left, Matthew, your thoughts? Do you think this is a dangerous moment?
I don't think it's dangerous. I agree with Wolfgang on that. But, as Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you all so much for your insights today. And thank you for watching To The Point. Let us know what you thought in the comments, and we hope to see you here next time.